Assalamu alaikum. Today you will learn about session management in Java. Before moving on to any of the further topics, please be informed that this is the 7th tutorial in the series of JSP and servlets in Java. So if you have not gone through the previous tutorials, I highly recommend you to go through those tutorials first and then come back to this tutorial. So without any further ado, let's get started. Let's say you go to an e-commerce web application, for example, Amazon.com. So the first thing that you do is log in into your application. So you go to the login page, input your credentials and log in. After that, you go for shopping. So you pick up all the groceries and add it into your cart. And once you have picked and added all the groceries that you want in your cart, you hop onto the checkout page. But let's say while making a payment at the checkout page, you encounter an error. All the items, all the groceries in your shopping cart is now gone and your shopping cart is empty again. And on top of that, the application is not able to recognize you. The application is asking you to again log in into the system and is again asking you for username and password. So what just happened? As you can see, this is now how a traditional e-commerce application works. We do not get such types of errors. So let's see what just happened. So once you picked up all the groceries and all the items that you want and added into your cart, and when you went for the checkout, your information, your groceries were nowhere saved on the system or anywhere. That's why on the payment page, you are able to see your cart going empty again. And on top of that, the system is again asking you for user credential. This is because when you logged in into the system, your credentials were not saved anywhere on the system, right? So after logging, when you went for shopping, your user credentials were not saved. And after shopping, when you went for checkout, your cart items information was not saved. So the process of storing users information for multiple requests and not just storing them, also managing those requests across the application is known as session management. Here you can see the user is making request for logging page, for shopping page, for checkout page, and the system should store these information and also manage those information and access those information wherever required. So this process is known as session management. So as you can see over here, session management is a technique to maintain the state of a user across multiple request and response, as I explained just now. Therefore, some mechanism is also needed to identify that user and store some information about the user's preferences, data, or actions. Got it? I hope you got an idea about session management. Now let's see how we can manage those sessions. So in JSP and servlets, we have two methods that we can implement session management. We have request dispatcher and send redirect. If you have been following my tutorials, I have already implemented and showed you how request dispatcher and send redirect works. In this tutorial, we will learn more about the workings and the underlying functionality of these methods. Now send redirect is implemented by one of the three ways using URL rewriting, HTTP sessions and cookies. Let's see how we can implement those. So let's understand what all these terminologies are. Request dispatcher. First, we will see the technical definition of request dispatcher and then we'll see how it works. Request dispatcher is implemented by using forward method, and this method forwards the request and response object from one servlet to the other servlet on the same server. The original server does not generate any output but delegates the processing to the target servlet, means the servlet 2. And the client is also not aware that his request has been forwarded to servlet 2, right? And this method is useful when the servlet needs to share data or collaborate to some task. Now let's see what does this means. So you are a client over here, and you make a request to some resource on servlet 1. Now servlet 1 does not generate any output. It just simply forwards your request and response object to servlet 2. Servlet 2 is the one that do all the processing and whatever response that needs to be generated and generate that response and send it back to the client. Now, as you can see over here, the client is unaware that his request and response object has been forwarded from servlet 1 to servlet 2. He just sends a request and gets the response, right? Now let's see some examples so that you are more clear on how this works. Suppose you are booking a flight ticket online and you fill in your personal and payment details on the form. When you submit the form, the servlet that handles your request forwards it to another servlet that validates your information and confirms your booking. The original servlet does not generate any output, but the target servlet displays a confirmation message and a booking reference number. The URL in your browser does not change and you do not know that the request is forwarded internally. Now let's see what does this means. So imagine you want to book a flight ticket and you make a request to do so and you have to fill a form to book a ticket. That form contains information like user email, user address or things like that, right? And the servlet 1 is the one that is taking your request, that is accepting the data in your form. The servlet 1 in turn does nothing, but it forwards your form or the request and response object along with whatever data that you want to the servlet 2, which is booking confirmation servlet. Now booking confirmation servlet does all the validation and checks the information, and finally it books the ticket and sends you a response in the form of an email or message or anything. So as you can see over here, the client has made a request and his request and response has been forwarded internally to Servlet 2. Servlet 2 is the one that is generating the final response. This is request dispatcher. Now let's see what is send redirect. Again, let's just go through the technical definition of send redirect, and then we'll see how does this works. Send redirect is implemented by using send redirect method of HTTP servlet response, right? So this method sends a redirect response to the client, instructing it to make a new request to the specified URL. The original servlet does not generate any output, but terminates the process. The client knows that the request is redirect and the URL in the browser changes. This method is useful when the servlet are on different servers, or when the servlet do not need to share data or collaborate on the same task. Now let's see what does this means. It means that when a client makes a request to servlet 1, the servlet 1 sends a response to the client, which let's say client has made a request 1 and the servlet has sent a response 1 to the client. Servlet 1 sends a request to the client instructing it to make another request 2 to a different servlet 2. This servlet does the operation required and sends a final response 2 back to the client. So the client has to make two requests, request 1 and request 2. The request 1 is sent to servlet 1 and servlet 1 sends a response. The request 2 is again made by the client to the servlet 2 and servlet 2 generates a final response for the client. Let's understand this with the help of an example. Suppose you have a servlet that handles login request from user. The servlet may check the user credentials and redirect the request to either a welcome page or an error page, depending upon if the user is valid or not. So here the original servlet does nothing or displays nothing to the user, but the target servlet displays the appropriate message, whether the user is authenticated or not authenticated. This way the original servlet can control the flow of the request based upon some logic, and the target servlet can provide the relevant response. Let's see what does this means. So let's suppose you log in into an application which tells you whether you are an authentic user or a non-authentic user. So the way it works is when you log in into your application, it gives you a welcome page or it gives you an error page. If you are a valid user, it gives you a welcome page. If you are invalid, it gives you error page. So you make a request to the server, request 1. Now this servlet takes your login information, your user credentials, and verifies if it is a valid user or not a valid user. The servlet 1 generates some response and send it to the client. The client again has to make a second request to the servlet, right? And this second request goes to servlet 2. This servlet 2 checks the data sent by servlet 1, and based on that information, it gives you a welcome message or gives you an error message in the response 2, right? Now, if you say what is the meaning of sending two requests over here? So let me inform you that being a client, you do not have to send two separate requests manually. As soon as servlet 1 sends a response, the client automatically makes another request to the servlet 2. You do not have to do anything for the second request. Although you can see when the second request is sent, because the URL gets changed. You will be able to understand more clearly when we will be doing it in practical. So whatever we have covered today, in the next tutorial, I will explain you all by showing you how does this looks like on the code. I will be implementing request dispatcher, send redirect, URL rewriting, HTTP session and cookies all in the next tutorial. So I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.